and it may well be that we'll be talking about the vaccine later on. We might have some questions about how our own staff are going to fare, but we'll move into the business. We don't have any apologies from any of the members or regular attendees. Does anyone have any new interest or any interest in any matter that's under discussion today that they need to declare before we start? I'm seeing shakes of the heads from members. Thank you. So if we can move to the minutes from the meeting of the 28th of September. First of all, I won't run through them page by page because that would take us all too long with our screens. Did anybody, had anybody spotted any errors or anything they wished to amend on the minutes? Again, I'm seeing shakes of the heads from the members. So then if you're all content that they're an accurate record, we will agree the minutes from the last meeting. There is one matter arising, which I think Mark Kenyon just wants to brief us on, arising from the Treasury Management Strategy, which we discussed last time, which is just to update us in terms of our holdings, or our holdings, but the situation at Croydon local authority. So Mark, do you want to say something about that now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is just to make members aware that obviously, as you know, in the approved Treasury Management Strategy for the PCC, we have investments in local authorities, and that makes up a significant proportion of our investments, mainly because of the reason why we invest in local authorities is because of the surety around us getting the money back, and also the interest rates tend to be better than the sort of bank rates we're getting at the moment. You'll be aware that local authorities are getting under increasingly financial pressure because of the situation they're in, whether it be COVID or other sort of underlying pressures as well in their finances. And members might be aware that Croydon Council issued a Section 114 in November, which basically means they cannot commit themselves to any additional expenditure within a certain time period, which basically means they've got a budget problem. Their expenditure is higher than their planned expenditure is higher than their income for the year. We've actually got £10 million invested in Croydon, which is due to mature next year. So what we've done in the paper is just highlight the investments we have with local authorities at the time of writing the note, and also the actions we're taking to mitigate the risk of investing with local authorities. The note sets out very clearly that we're pretty certain we will get the money back from Croydon, and we've had written assurance from them. Obviously, it's a contractual arrangement we have with them, which they have to honour. So what myself and Neil have discussed is actually amending the Treasury Management Strategy of the PCC, which is mainly limiting the investments we have with a particular local authority to 6 months, and the actual maximum value that we invest in a local authority is 5 million. At the next meeting in March, we will have the Treasury Management Strategy for the next financial year, where we will sort of obviously include those amendments. And also members will be aware as well, obviously we're increasing our due diligence around the investments we make in local authorities as well, to sort of consider more around their sort of budget position and what's happening at their local level. So that was it really in terms of an update and the actions we're taking.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Mark. I mean, I suspect if you'd taken a look at Croydon at the point at which you made the decision, there wouldn't have been anything to tell you that this situation was going to have arisen. So, you know, there's only so much that due diligence will tell you. But it sounds as though you've got some sensible steps to limit or to spread exposure, which makes sense. So we'll see that in more detail next time, as you've said. Gurinder, I think, has a question on that before we move off, though.
Thank you, Chair. Just to understand so I understand we'll get more information next time. Just to understand some of the information you'll be looking at, and particularly in regards to some of the other local authorities, are there any risk factors in respect of Croydon that you'll be looking at in respect of other local authorities? My understanding is that some local authorities are getting into trouble because of investments they've made into large-scale property developments. And if that's the case, are we looking at other local authorities that we've invested in to consider any risks in respect to those in the same way?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. As part of the due diligence, what we're going to look at is the sort of debt exposure of each local authorities concerned. Because one of the issues with Croydon is around, which you've probably seen in the press, is their overarching sort of debt levels that they've invested in sort of retail areas and things like that, which obviously under the current climate has made it worse. So we're going to be looking at sort of overall sort of financial position, whether that be debt or their underlying pressures in other areas as well. So
Okay, thank you, Mark. That's fine. Brendan?
Yeah, could I just sort of try and get a sort of a sense of Mark's judgment across the whole of the local authority field at the moment? Has a local authority ever defaulted on effectively what is an inter-government or an inter-public sector debt, to your knowledge?
to my knowledge, no sort of details. The situation with Northamptonshire, which happened a couple of years ago, you're probably aware that they issued a Section 114.
Yeah.
And they owed money to another local authority, and they paid it back within the original arrangements. So as far as I know, I'm not aware of anybody who's defaulted on an interlocal authority loan. And obviously, from a local authority point of view, I'm not aware of any of them defaulted on loans in general as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's reassuring. I mean, the problem with due diligence is that it's a good thing to do, clearly, but in the case of Croydon, until the collapse in commercial property values occurred sort of in the early stages of COVID, and because of their investment in retail, you wouldn't have seen the sudden exposure to debt versus assets actually manifest itself. So it's a really unpredictable scenario. So whilst obviously as much due diligence as we can, in some ways the Croydon situation is a product of possibly a risky investment strategy, but also the impact of COVID on retail and hotels, which is where an awful lot of their money went, as evidenced in the back pages of Private Eye over the last 6 months.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Although I don't suggest we use Private Eye as our source of evidence.
I actually think if you look at Private Eye's record on spotting disasters coming, whatever they are, it's pretty good.
Okay. Okay. So thanks for that. As we've said, we'll be coming back to this because you are proposing, as a result, some changes to the way we make decisions on this. So that's helpful, and we can perhaps have a more in-depth discussion next time. I don't think there's anything else under matters arising. So if we can move on then to item 5, the first substantive paper, which is on anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policy and the review of effectiveness. This has got Mark's name on it, but also Chief Superintendent Twyford. So I don't know which of you wants to kick off.
I'm more than happy to do so, Chair, if that's okay with Mark.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay, so obviously you have a paper that's been submitted. If I just highlight and introduce that paper, it explores complaints and conduct matters from the period, or the 12-month period, from the 1st of November 2019 to the 31st of October 2020. And it's in relation to, as already mentioned, the broader corruption and fraud potential issues in West Midlands Police. I guess you've all got the paper, so I don't intend to go into it in too much detail, but I will summarise from some key points from my point of view as head of department. The first one is that ultimately these allegations are very low within West Midlands Police when you look at the broader context, and that they're outlined in the report itself. And in the reporting period of 12 months, there's been 14 allegations involving 15 different people within West Midlands Police, and 12 of those being police officers and 3 members of police staff. And again, the sort of outcomes, so 5 of the cases, also the themes of them, 5 of business interests, a couple of change of circumstances of 4, 3 were overtime fraud, and 2 misuse and 1 of the fraud. And during that reporting period, 5 cases have been finalised, and they're in the appendix that are attached to the report. And of course, individual officers and staff details are not disclosed in the report, nor will I go into any in-depth details within the reports. I guess for me, from a counter-corruption side, we do receive reports of theft and fraud. It is one of the categories that counter-corruption does look at, and we do receive intelligence in relation to those. However, only 5 elements or 5 intelligence sort of logs, we will call them, are received into within the last strategic period. Theft and fraud, as I said, for us, it's really low level, so it's not part of a priority for us within professional standards. It is always on our radar. It doesn't feature in our control strategy because it's not a key threat for us. I've noted in the report, we've just put a little bit around, it does feature in the national control strategy and the threat assessment to UK law enforcement. And that's because we've got a couple of forces that are seeing elements around theft and fraud. But again, I reaffirm in West Midlands Police, that isn't an issue or a threat for us at this moment in time. I'll probably touch on why, I suppose, and that talks about our prevention intervention team that's mentioned at point 3 in the report. And that's a team that seeks to endeavour to better understand the information that we receive and also be able to intervene in an early process. That team, alongside others, have devised a series of online packages where new staff and frontline supervisors are delivered those packages. Last year, challenging in relation to frontline supervisors due to training, but there is a plan in relation to that. And then we also touch on, and some of you will have heard of this before, around our vulnerability interviews and our conversations that take place when we believe it's appropriate to intervene at an early stage. We also talk about the report, which is why I believe it's so low, and that's we have instituted an annual integrity health check, which goes online from this month. And that allows frontline supervisors with their individual officers and staff to have a conversation, and also staff to complete the online integrity check. And that looks at and reassures ourselves in relation to business interests and other vulnerabilities that may disclose and change the circumstances that may take place. And there's a final bit there around the forces whistleblowing policy, which is live on our website. There's a couple of recommendations in relation to the report. The first one, which is at point 1 of the report, really, it's a manual search process we've gone through this year, so a bit of learning our end to make it quicker. We've just using a different terminology in relation to, so we can dig out these items, although they're very few anyway for us. And secondly, due to the, although the small number, 14 allegations, those were linked to mainly business interest and change of circumstances, and that's now built into the annual online integrity check that we have. So in conclusion, it remains low for me. It's not a huge priority for us. We do treat every case very, very seriously and proportionately. And again, the ongoing work and the broader picture around our intervention with the department or with the organisation, I believe, puts us in a relatively healthy place. I'd pause there, Chair, hand over to Mark, and then hand over to any questions from anyone on screen.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. All I'd like to add really is the work of internal audit, which has taken place this year in terms of fraud. The report highlights some of the areas we've looked at in terms of the sort of day-to-day audits that have been undertaken, things like bank reconciliation, payroll, and to date, no issues of fraud have been identified. But obviously, with most audits, you do identify sort of control risks. Some of them is of a minor nature. The rest of that section talks about National Fraud Initiative, which we participate in, and some of the savings that have been generated locally through that exercise. I think it's about £38,000, and that's really been around sort of detection of some errors in pensions in terms of eligibility, and a small amount relating to creditor payments. So I welcome any questions.
Okay, I'm seeing Richard and then Kath. So Richard first, please.
Yeah, thank you for the report. I had a general question about annual integrity checks, but you've addressed that in your introduction, so thank you for that. You in section 3, you also talk about training, and it'd be helpful if you have that data to know kind of what numbers have been trained or are being trained, just so I got some sort of idea of the run rate in terms of where we were with that.
Yeah, yes, of course, Richard. So the first thing is let's separate into new recruits coming to the organisation and then frontline supervisors. So every new recruit has the training. That's part of the training introduction in the package when you join West Midlands Police. The second element of that is frontline supervisors. So figures from 2018, 277, which in essence is the number of frontline supervisors that are promoted in the organisation. 2019 is 144, again mirroring those. Last year there wasn't any training, and that's obviously due to the COVID strategy and training. So we spoke with Learning Development. We're going to dock that into the annual integrity checks, and there is a sort of a self-learning tool in relation to that. There's a plan in place, obviously, this year. Once we move out the COVID restrictions around training, we'll be back to normal. But in essence, circa 200 people that we'll probably have from last year and then to the start of this year, they'll be targeted through the online integrity checks, and that'll be led through the prevention intervention team.
Thank you.
Okay, Kath?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the report. My questions are, I've cast my net a little bit broad on the questions for you, Dave. So the one regarding the national fraud initiative, where there's savings of over 38,000 being identified. So that seems to relate mainly to overpayments. Have staff identified that they've been overpaid, or is that something that you found out because of the initiative, in which case what's the process in managing them, and whether that becomes an issue of honesty or not? So that's the first question. The second question is regarding the cases that have gone for investigation, and where there's been no case to answer following the completion of an investigation, what support is there for officers when they return back into the workforce?
So if I pick up the second, Mark, I don't know if you've got any commentary on the first. So as you say, Kath, there is always a well-being issue when allegations are made that are found no case to answer, and obviously we treat them as that, no case to answer. And there is, I think, the constant dialogue we have with both when someone that has an allegation made against them and they're under investigation, there's always a welfare officer aligned to them, and it's that welfare officer is the key relationship actually with professional standards, because obviously you've got the whole psychological contract that sort of falls away a little bit during the investigation, and to be fair, it's really the responsibility of the welfare officer and PSD to make sure that individual comes back into the workplace appropriately, understand any concerns, and obviously will then link in to the relevant line management. As it's interesting, we've got a colleague at the moment going through a master's degree at a local university, and their master's, and we've just agreed the data set for that is exactly around the psychological contract in relation to being under investigation and what happens thereafter. So perhaps this time next year, once they've gone through the study and they've got that report, I'll happily share it with you. It's firmly on our radar. I'm not naive enough to suggest that at times that's tricky when people come back to work and the relationships involved. But again, that's the duty of first, second line management and a good relationship with welfare officers and also professional standards.
Thank you, Dave. And the first question?
Yeah,
do you want me to pick up on the first question, Mark?
You can do if you want.
Yeah, no problem. So Kath, in relation to the National Fraud Initiative, the deceased pensioners is the main contributor to that, and in the majority of cases, we do actually already know that the pensioners passed away. It's just a case that we haven't yet recovered the money from the estate. So we have to record it as a known case, but we're in the process of actually trying to recoup that money. So in a lot of the cases we already know, there was £7,000 of that related to people who were also in receipt of injury benefits. Now that is an annual check, and it's an honesty check where people are due to notify us. And in a couple of cases, that notification hadn't been chased and resulted in some form of overpayment, which is being recovered. So there is an element of process involved with recovering those overpayments, but we have to do it in a sensitive way. And sometimes it can take us a fairly long time to get that money back into the organisation, but it is being progressed by the pensions department. And in the majority of occasions, there was 437 deceased pensioners that we were notified of, and the majority of those were already known to us. So, but this is a biannual exercise. We'll get more cases, and we also take part in mortality screening on an annual basis as well. And it's a fail-safe for us, really, just to pick up on any unknown cases, which are very few.
That's great. Thank you very much. And actually, the sums involved are quite small against the bigger scheme of West Midlands. Thanks very much, both.
Okay.
Thank you, Kath. Gurinder, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about the timelines on. So in the Appendix A, there's a number of cases which are still ongoing. What sort of timeline do you expect a case to take from initial, complaint or observation through to completion? And then what are we also looking at in terms of, are we looking at further report back to this committee in terms of resolution of these at some point? And then in a similar way, do you have statistics in terms of previous years where cases, how long they took? Are there still cases outstanding? I think we talked about staff coming back in and the impact of them reintegrating, but also if you were suspended or if you were under investigation for a long period of time, that would also have an impact on individuals as well.
Okay, if I try and break that down then if I can. So really good question. Timeliness is critical really to a variety of reasons. I can't give you an answer on how long would something take, because every case is very, very different. I guess the onus of me and my department is to ensure that it's done in the most efficient and effective way in line with the new regulations. I suppose that sort of leads into the second point really around, or your third point, should I say. Your second point is about the answers to what we've got in Appendix A. The broader bit is, I'll probably tie into the new regulations. The new regulations, and I sat down with colleagues from the OPCC yesterday, just to share some reports from the House of Commons around the new regs and what they're there to do. And a key part of that is to try and be, keys around learning, reflective practice, taking a proportionate approach to what matters that end up at gross misconduct hearings, for example. The broader theme of the regulations is for us to try and learn and be better as an organisation. That will, of course, in time, allow us to be more efficient and to, be better in terms of our timeliness. Just coming back to the second point, really, about these. I mean, I suppose, if there's an ask from the chair for me to come back with an update in relation to those, I can't tell you when they're going to be finalised, but I'd probably suggest that next time I sit before this committee, there will be an update to that appendix, of course, because they'll be in the last 12 months. If that's suitable for the chair.
Chair, can I just come
you want to come back before yes, go on.
Yeah. I think that there are a small number of cases, and as Kath observes, they're quite small in the big scheme of things. So I'm not sure we need update on each case, on a regular basis. So the annual update would probably suffice. It would be helpful, though, as part of that annual update, to identify cases which are, outstanding and how long they've been outstanding for. I think that would be reasonable as part of the annual update.
Okay, thanks, Gurinder, for that. So I agree. Actually, I'm used to a system in the health service where actually there would be a target for how long an investigation might take. I mean, bearing in mind that actually there are always things that might interrupt that. but it was regarded as good practice to actually have something you should be aiming at. In other words, you know, if it's going to be longer than this, then that's a worry for exactly the reasons that members have outlined, and there'd be you'd need to have a reason for why it was taking longer than that, and probably an agreement with someone about the timeline. I think I do agree with Gurinder. I don't think we need you to come back on these specific, given the numbers. I think it's satisfactory that we see these on an annual basis. But that wider point about how long are they taking? Are there any of these that have actually been in the system for, say, more than 6 months? You know, and if that was the case, we might want you to just advise us, not necessarily wait for the next meeting, but just send us something to let us know. But in terms of the numbers that you're reporting, and I take on board what you're saying about we're not seeing large numbers, we're not seeing systematic examples of fraud, so it's not a high priority for us. But in many places, low numbers, especially if they are comparatively low numbers as well compared to other people, of allegations or whistleblowing coming through, would probably be seen as something that we ought to be more curious about, to put it at its least worrisome. So I take on board what you're saying about, you know, the way we're now ensuring that people know about what's expected of them and know how to make how to check their own position and be more wary. But I would continue to have a slight worry that comparatively low and actually low numbers might be evidence that there's something that's being missed, as opposed to evidence that there's not a problem.
I think if I wasn't so reassured about the process we go through, the analytical tools that we have, the business processes we have to understand and identify those, I'd probably agree with you. But I sit here with some comfort, some confidence that we have those. You know, it's never not going to be on our radar. It's never not going to be. It's never going to be something we're not going to look at. And we have, you know, a multifaceted approach with various triggers that, you know, allow us to understand individuals' behaviour or otherwise. And it's that level of activity that gives me the confidence.
Okay. Thanks for that then. I don't see any other hands raised. So I think we can leave that, and we'll see you again on this topic for the next review. Thank you for that. Okay, item 6 we can move on to then now is the regular report on what's going on with Her Majesty's Inspectorate. So Inspector Ahmed, can I see you, Shamim? Yes, there you are. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Shamim.
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I've shared the report with yourselves already, and I'll go through the highlights of them. So since the last report, what we've been doing internally is having a large review of all our HMRC recommendations, and predominantly the ones that are actively being monitored by HMRC. So in the report, you'll see that we've looked at reviewing 98 of those recommendations, of which 6 were RAG rated red, 54 amber, and 38 were green. So in relation to the red ones, which will be of particular interest to yourselves, these covered areas such as our crime data integrity, missing, and all the subjects that have previously featured within the Joint Audit Committee reports. And the panel was chaired. So the process that took place was we had a panel that was chaired by DCC Jardine, included Neil Chamberlain himself, as well as Harry Barton, who is the head of strategy and direction. And all the owners came through that panel and gave their updates, and decisions were made as to whether sufficient progress had been made to move it on into business as usual, or whether they could be signed off internally by the force as having been completed. That's given us a really great understanding of where we are in terms of the progress of the recommendations, and I'll be taking a number of those forward through to HMRC to ask for formal sign-off by themselves. What that means is that for us as a force, we're in a really good and strong position moving forward towards the inspection that will be taking place later on this year. And that process will be repeated every 6 months now, with the next lot of panels taking place in July, where we'll go back, revisit those recommendations, see what progress has been made, and if there's any new recommendations that have been brought in from reports, then we'll pick those up as well and discuss those as part of that. So moving on, we looked at what inspections have taken place since the September meeting and my report to you then. So I mentioned that we were going to have a COVID inspection, or rather a document submission for us as a force. So 19 forces were inspected with a remote inspection whereby they spoke to various different individuals and covered off the areas of the response to COVID, how well things were working, and how the forces were addressing the problems. Our submission was a document submission. The force submitted well in excess of 60 documents. We've got a comprehensive governance process in place with a gold group, strategies, and various leads assigned. And as understandably, you can imagine that that process is still running at the moment, which is making sure that the force is in a best position as possible to be able to respond to all the changes that are taking place around COVID. The next inspection that we had was around policing protests. So this one was the one that was commissioned quite speedily by the Home Secretary in response to a bill that's coming out this month, looking at the protection of police and public. And so we were one of a number of forces that were picked to take part in that inspection. It was a remote inspection where we submitted some documents. We then enabled HMIC to speak to a number of key staff within the organisation. So feedback from that inspection was that the force manages our protest really well. We make good use of intelligence, and we're working well with our partners as well. And more importantly, we provide a proportionate response to the protest. So each protest that we're notified of, we make great efforts, gather all the information to make sure that we're responding to it in a legitimate and proportionate way so that we can work with the organisers of those protests and make sure that we take everybody's needs into account, including those of the communities as well. Interestingly, part of the inspection is looking at whether forces need extra legislation to be able to manage protests. And for us as a force, what was really reassuring was that our staff told HMIC that we felt that we had sufficient legislation to be able to police the protests, and we didn't feel we needed anything more robust. Whereas other forces, I'm able to share with you, have said that they felt they needed perhaps extra legislation. All of that input has gone into HMIC, who've done a report, and I'm sure that that will come out in the findings of that new bill and the proposals that will take place as part of that. And the third inspection that we've had so far, this last year rather, was the joint thematic inspection on police and CPS response to rape. So once again, that was a virtual inspection. We submitted a number of documents and they spoke to a number of our key representatives across the force, including our force exec leads and our force leads who are overseeing rape for the force. So throughout that, we've had some, that inspection has been completed. We've had feedback in relation to that, and it was largely positive. There are a number of areas that the force is, that were highlighted to us that the force is looking at in more detail, and will be taking that forward through our force lead. So those are the inspections that have taken place so far. We've since been notified that we'll be having a sensitive intelligence inspection take place, and that's one that will be looking at National Crime Agency, regional organised crime units, and also forces. So for us, that will be taking place week commencing 25th of January. so not far away at all. For us, most of our capability around intelligence and the handling of sensitive intelligence sits within our regional organised crime unit. However, we have a force capability that sits within our force intelligence unit. So in some respects, we've involved in both aspects of it. So that's being coordinated at the moment. The inspection is taking place 25th of January, and we should be in a position to be able to provide you an update for the March committee. So moving on to the reports that have been published, I've covered them off broadly. So there were two reports that were published at the time of writing this report. The first one was the National Crime Agency Inspection Report in relation to regional organised crime units. That one looked at how well both agencies were working. There's a number of recommendations, and they're all either for the NCA or other agencies to progress, but we'll keep an eye on that and make sure that we're picking up anything that's of interest to us as well. And the second report was around pre-charge bail and released under investigation, striking the balance report. So this was an inspection where there was recognition by HMIC that when the released under investigation legislation was brought in, it was brought in at speed to ensure that people weren't being placed on bail for a protracted period of time. What there's also been recognition is that whilst this recommendation, this legislation was brought in to address a particular concern, it inadvertently brought in another number of other issues, which was around the way that suspects were managed and the victims' abilities to be able to access certain safeguarding or other support that they would have ordinarily been able to get had the suspects not been released under investigation. So in that one, there's a number of recommendations that have also been made, two of which in particular are for forces. So one of those will be sitting within our criminal justice system, department, and the other one is likely to sit within our investigation, because it makes recommendations for within the case files for it to be clearly outlined if people are being released under investigation. And then there was a supplementary report that was published alongside, which was through a think tank into increasing awareness around victims' perceptions of how they felt that this legislation was affecting them. So really interesting reports that have come out. Now, at the end of my report, I've mentioned that we've had confirmation that our appeal inspection will be taking place week commencing 14th of June, all the way through to the 10th of July. So previously I've talked through how the HMIC have changed their inspection process from the integrated appeal assessments that they introduced just over two and a half years ago to this more broader continuous improvement, continuous inspection process. And what will be taking place is, although we will have those 4 intensive weeks when HMIC will be working more closely with the force, speaking to key individuals and looking at key areas that they've identified for further work, there has started already a set of interviews and meetings that will lead us up to that intensive 4 weeks. And what that will also include is a number of weeks before that, we will have our CDI and victim service assessment, which is an amalgam of what used to be the separate CDI inspection, which is now incorporating a broader aspect of the victim service assessment, which I've shared with yourselves previously, looking at effectively how victims are treated by a police service, all the way from initial contact through to any outcomes and CJ processes that may take place as well. So that will mean that once again, for the March report, we should hopefully be in a position to provide you further detail in respect to that. And I'll take questions if there's any questions from people.
Thank you very much for that. It's a comprehensive overview of what's going on. Brendan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, really two questions. One fairly simple factual one, and one slightly wider. So DCC Jardine may want to comment as well. Could you just tell me what the difference is between intelligence and sensitive intelligence? How does that distinction work, and what areas are sort of typical examples of sensitive intelligence that are going to be looked at? And then the second question, which is the sort of rather wider one, is given that we're sort of encouraged to learn lessons from other people's experience, the inspections into Greater Manchester Police have revealed some fairly serious shortcomings. That was, I think, sort of made public sort of just before Christmas. Have you looked at what was in those reports, and does it give anyone any concern that we've got similar issues which we possibly haven't spotted, particularly in the area of crime recording and the management of domestic abuse cases?
Yes, thank you for those questions. So the first one, the difference between intelligence and sensitive intelligence. So in essence, any information about activity that's shared with us by the public or any other source is a form of intelligence. Sensitive intelligence is, in effect, anything that we would perhaps deal with in perhaps a covert way, or use tactics that we wouldn't necessarily that we would need access to either regulatory of the Police Information Act sources to be able to act on that. So what this inspection will be doing is, although it will be looking at those areas, it won't need us to necessarily divulge our tactics, because naturally what that will do is potentially compromise the force's ability to be able to respond to certain ongoing investigations or operations that might be taking place. So that's, broadly speaking, the difference between the two. In relation to your second question about lessons learned, and I will welcome comment from the DCC as well. So the report that you refer to, yes, absolutely, we've read it, we've reviewed it, and we're looking to see what lessons there are in relation to how WMP works. Already in preparation for our CDI and Peel inspection, we've put into place a new governance group, which is our vulnerability gold group, that incorporates how we're picking up and looking at our crime data integrity. We've introduced a new audit function into the force with a superintendent that's been aligned to look at that. And so the findings of that report are being fed into that, and we're reviewing our own processes and working closely with HMIC to see where we're at and how we can improve our crime recording process. I'll pass over to Marn Jardine if she wishes to add comment.
Thanks, Shameen. Thank you. I think just in addition to what Shameen has said there, just to give you some reassurance, I was actually on the phone to the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police this morning, and I'm having a meeting tomorrow morning with the superintendent that is leading their response, just to really make sure that I understand completely the nuances of their report, and we can absolutely learn the lessons. I've been, one of my primary responsibilities is around, force performance and how we improve performance, and we've been working very hard, since last July now, on doing just that, but also with an eye on the inspection regime that the HMIC will do, and the inspection that they did in GMP is the one that they will do in West Midlands Police, as Shameen has outlined later this year. So we're very alive. We are a very similar sized force, slightly larger here than GMP, and we know that our increases in domestic abuse are extremely high, and that has created real challenges within our domestic abuse teams, for example. And we also know that the HMIC previously have identified areas in our crime data integrity, which is our crime recording, that we have absolutely committed to improving. So to reassure you, we are very much in consultation with GMP, but also we've been working very hard on this now for a considerable time to make sure that we are delivering the absolute best service to the victims and communities of West Midlands.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, and it's reassuring to know that we're already in touch and talking to them. Jonathan, Chief Executive, also wanting to come in. Jonathan.
Thanks, Chair. Just to address the points that further address the points that Brendan has made on the sensitive intelligence inspection. I understand that this has actually been signed off between HMIC FRS and IPCO, the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. So it's unique and novel in that sense, and it's actually I would suggest that we would welcome an inspection in this area. We met with the Investigatory Powers Commissioner, Sir Brian Leveson, recently, because we've been of the view for a while that there is a degree of ambiguity about the role of police and crime commissioners in the oversight of covert tactics, and even sponsored an amendment to the covert authorities bill that's going through Parliament at the moment that would have given a role for PCCs in relation to IPCO inspections analogous to that exists for HMIC FRS inspections, so that there would be a requirement on PCCs to review and respond to recommendations from IPCO. So we really welcome this report, and we'll be supporting it in terms of sitting in on the initial briefings and the hot debrief at the end as well. In relation to the GMP report that you mentioned, Brendan, that inspection report we've used as the basis of a broadening of the terms of reference for an item that's coming to the Commissioners' group meeting in February. We were going to be looking at investigations and related issues anyway in February, and the inspection report into Manchester has prompted us to broaden the scope of that a bit, to make sure that we have looked at what they found in Manchester and whether there are lessons for us here in the West Midlands as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you all. That's some interesting questions there, and thank you for the responses to them. I don't see anyone else wanting to come in, so thank you for your report, Shameen. We'll see the updates on it on what's happening next time, but we'll now move on to item 7, which is the regular report on risk. So who's kicking off on this?
I can start.
Mark or Harry? Right, Mark, okay.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. So regular item on risk. Every meeting we discuss risk. If I can sort of talk about the Police and Crime Commissioners' risk management arrangements, and also where we are in terms of the risk register itself. The report sets out in para 212 some of the areas that have changed and we've considered to actually develop the risk register, which is in the appendix. You can see that there's been a number of areas that have had comments on, and the area where I think the risk has increased slightly is in relation to resources. We've talked about sort of in this meeting the risks around things like investments, also the issues around the settlement only being being in existence, only just receiving the settlement, and it's only for 1 year in terms of police funding settlement. We've got we're yet to know things like how much money we're going to get for violence reduction and victims' money for next year, and the sort of overall sort of level of money we have around sort of preventative activities has kind of stayed the same for a number of years now. Another area that it's alluded to is around sort of the crime levels. They've gone back to normal levels, sort of pre-COVID, and obviously we're going into another sort of deep lockdown, which might impact on those crime levels. But as we've said already, domestic abuse cases have gone up. The point around the impact on the overall economy is obviously going to have an impact on things like developing employment opportunities for young people and the overall workforce itself. we allude to sort of issues as well around sort of the police uplift programme. Obviously, that helps in terms of the development of a modern police force. But these things that potentially are sort of very challenging in the future. Sort of focusing as I would on the sort of financing side. Obviously, the impact potentially of a pay freeze might have an impact in the future in terms of recruiting posts across the force in general. So those are the main areas I wanted to highlight. I don't know if anybody's got any particular questions they want to ask on those points.
Nothing's coming through at the moment, so should we hand over to Harry and then pick up on questions more generally?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I mean, I think the broad sentiment for the risk update for the force as a whole is very similar. I think when I spoke at the committee last time, I was kind of 3 months into the role and had taken an initial view over the corporate risk register. I think, I would have characterised it at the time as showing kind of the component parts of risk in the organisation. But I think what we've tried to do this time is update it to show some of the more sort of systemic kind of and interconnected effects of risk, which is why we've also brought out some of the kind of, I suppose, elevated risk around things like demand management, as well as the obvious kind of ongoing impact of COVID on the organisation. The other thing I would say is that we took the opportunity to also deep dive risks in the crime portfolio in the last quarter. And that was a way to test out some of our thinking around how we might advance our approach to assessing risk at the different levels in the organisation, and taking on board some of the feedback from the committee last time around, again, things like connections between different parts of the business and the sort of multiplier effect of different risks and initiatives that are linked. So there's a bit more in our risk register this time, particularly around these sorts of mitigation key controls and activities. Quite a lot of detail there. I think the other kind of main additions are around the impact on criminal justice case backlog, which I think was highlighted within a single risk before, but we've called it out on its own this time around because of the significance of it. I think that's all there is to say in terms of the content of the risk register itself. In terms of the broader review of risk that we've been conducting, my department's been conducted, it's been really helpful to do that in parallel to the HMIC sort of AFIs and recommendations review that Shameen mentioned previously. So that's enabled us to again think about the join up of those activities. And I think that will have some consequences for sort of governance and oversight for risk generally in the organisation. But the review itself that Shamim also conducted has now completed, and there's a number of recommendations that we're looking to take forward. So I'll be able to update the committee on those at its next meeting.
Thanks very much, both of you. So I think there will be a number of questions, some of which will be interlinked. So let's start with Richard, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks both for the introduction. I've just got a general question, which will probably broaden out into something more detailed. And the risk registers do reference data sharing and also kind of access to crime data now that we are a third country as a result of Brexit. And just wondered if you could give us a sense of what the impact of that was in terms of our ability to detect crime and keep communities safe if that data isn't available to us. But more widely and more generally, do we have a sense or a knowledge of where we're keeping our data? And if we are a third country and it's in an EAA repository in the cloud somewhere, are we taking steps to bring that back in so that we aren't in breach of anything?
I can talk a little bit about, I think the sort of processes and directives that I believe we're now reliant upon. I don't know anything about the where we're hosting our data though, so I'm not sure if that's something that might be more sort of Neil's area, but I'm sure it's something we can certainly take away to find out more on. My understanding is that as we don't have access to Schengen information system anymore. We still are able to operate through the Law Enforcement Directive, which I think has slightly different controls. And as part of the Data Protection Act, allows for some exemptions whereby if we weren't able to get access to information, it would damage the process of an investigation. So my understanding is that we are able to still get access and to share data and information. I think the other point of note is that around the sort of European arrest warrants, anything that was granted before 11 o'clock on New Year's Eve will remain valid and actionable. So anything that would have gone on the system at that point, is still in play, as it were. The remainder of European arrest warrants will be returned back to the National Crime Agency and the National Extradition Unit, which is part of the International Crime Coordination Centre, and that's again particularly for kind of high and medium risk cases, with lower risk ones being sent back to individual forces for action. But I also believe that our head of ROCU is going to be updating the PCC's office on this as a result of a question that's come via the Brexit Gold that we have running. Thanks.
Is that Neil's hand wanting to come in on that? Yeah, looks like it. Yeah. Neil?
Only briefly, Richard, just to add, obviously, we host a whole range of different systems and services within the force and nationally. Some of those are on premise, some are in the cloud. Obviously, Kate Jeffries, who's the lead for our data security, has been involved in all the planning, both the COVID, new systems implementation, as well as the Brexit. So if there's any specific services or areas of concern, obviously bring those back to audit committee, but nothing's been raised with me specifically.
Sorry, thank you.
Sue, I think you're muted.
I was, and I was wondering why Kath hadn't unmuted and come in. Thank you, Kath.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are about the appendix and the information there at 7A. So the first entry, which is about information management, describes that if West Midlands doesn't pass the next crime data integrity inspections, there's an implication that they'll have the engaged status. Could you explain what that is and what the likelihood of West Midlands achieving or being put into that category, because it sounds like it's a failing category? That's my first question. My next question is around disclosure. Do we have a full-time disclosure officer? And what work they're doing to guide the force through the new Attorney General guidelines, which is also mentioned in the same section there. And then a question that follows on from that is that there seems to be an enormous amount of work that needs to go into achieving those Attorney General guidelines, and how that will eat into the police officer uplift that is coming to the force, and then how other demands might also eat into the uplift, and how much additional activity will take away from that new, or additional demands will take away from the benefit of that police uplift.
Thank you, Kath. We'll take the Deputy Chief Constable first, then to answer some of that or all of that.
Yes, no, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kath, for the question. So this relates partly to the answer I was giving in the previous question. So we have been inspected previously on our crime data integrity and have found to require improvements to be made, and that is the current position. The moving into special measures is what GMP has undergone, which is where you undergo more rigorous engagement with the Home Office around your performance. We are absolutely doing everything we can to prevent that, because we I think that has a detrimental impact potentially on the communities that we serve, who lose confidence in the service that we are giving. So it's there. It's also you also come under additional scrutiny from the HMIC, as you would inspect as the inspectorate of constabularies. It is there. It's there for every force as a sort of progression if your performance is not seen to be improving in the required way. And that's why we've been working very hard on this for a number of months, and in fact years now. So we have to see the improvement. I am confident that we are seeing that improvement with the audits that I'm having carried out on a weekly basis at the moment. But that's essentially what it means, is that you come under a greater scrutiny from those national bodies in relation to your performance. Does that answer the first part, Kath?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Yeah.
In relation to the Director General's guidance, we in fact have had a panel on this morning. So in terms of our overall uplift, we are running a process that many members will be knowledgeable of, which is a priority-based budgeting process, so that we are considering in a really detailed financial, operational and performance view where our uplift officers, our additionality, will be placed into the organisation. And that includes both police officers and police staff, and making sure that we then see the benefits of that additionality. It was raised this morning around those guidelines. We do have concerns in the force around the amount of work that those guidelines are impacting upon. They are not necessarily directly related to uplift. It is just a matter that we will now have to apply those guidelines to a broader range of case files, which requires considerable amount of work. So we are just looking as an organisation as to how we ensure that the teams that are going to be required to do that additional work are supported. It's not directly related to uplift. It's a change in the requirements of our commitment to disclosure.
And the other part of that is, do we have a full-time disclosure officer who takes responsibility for leading the force through not just the attorney guidelines, but also the issues that have been raised around disclosure knowledge and how that feeds into the investigation process?
So we don't have a full-time officer whose responsibility it is, but ACC Jane Meir has the portfolio for investigations and crime, and therefore that and criminal justice, and that sits within her portfolio as the responsible Assistant Chief Constable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Gurinder, did you also want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. My question on Appendix 7A regards Britain's exit from the EU. So this is showing a high to medium risk, and the trajectory shows that's increasing. We do get reports on this regularly to the Strategic Police and Crime Board, and my understanding from those reports has been that there's been a lot of work going on this, and whilst there are a number of points where the West Midlands Police and other police forces interact with other police forces across Europe, that information, that those systems will inevitably change. And whilst some of those changes may be more difficult than other changes, it essentially means that a longer term or longer time periods for some of that information to come across, or some of those things to be enacted, or some of those partnerships to be enforced in whatever field that is. But I never got the impression from those reports that the risk of that is increasing. I thought that was being managed quite well. I'm just trying to work out the correlation with this.
I can come back on that. I think it was purely a proximity point, and again the connection to the COVID situation. So obviously in the run up to Christmas and New Year, we were in a situation where the possibility or the likelihood of disruption was being kind of magnified. But I think most certainly, a lot of work has gone into preparing ourselves for the sort of the 1st of January, and I think it's been shown that in terms of things like import and export and our supply chains, actually that's all remained relatively smooth. I don't know, Neil may want to say more about that aspect.
Yeah, so specifically on the contract and procurement and the supply chain, Harry, obviously we've done a fantastic piece of work this year with working with our suppliers around COVID and impact on supply chain. That relationship with all our suppliers has been really welcomed, and we've maintained that through the last 12 months, and that sort of steers us through to the any potential impact on Brexit as well. So we're in a really good place in terms of local intelligence, understanding where tipping points are, and also being able to, if you like, stimulate the market and understand where, if we need to generate, greater supply chains, we can do that. So we're in a really good place on that. Really proud of the work that the contracts and procurement team have done.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Richard, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, just on the COVID issue, Chair. As we're rolling out the vaccine across the nation, kind of with kind of some more momentum this week, do any colleagues have any idea of where officers fit in terms of the hierarchy of groups that have been identified as priorities? Obviously, health and care workers have been identified, but it's just an information point for me, really, and colleagues of do we know where you are in that sequence, or has it not been specified?
I can answer that, Chair. There is a significant push by the Home Office for police officers to be considered for early vaccination alongside other key workers. No agreement or decision has yet been made, but there is a national push from the Home Office. So I can't answer your question definitively, Richard, in terms of when that might be. All I can say is that it's recognised by the Home Office and supported by the Home Office.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Kath, you also had a further question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's in relation to risk number 40, which is vulnerability and hidden crimes. There's a reference in there to an escalation policy for partners. Could we have a description of what that escalation policy is and an example of how that's been used by partners?
It's probably not something I can answer. I don't know if Shamim is still on. She might have a more detailed view.
If no one who's on the call is able to answer that, perhaps we could ask Lynn to just source the person who will know the answer for us and circulate it to members of the committee at a later date. Can you do that, Lynn?
Yeah, will do, Chair. That's fine.
Okay, is that okay, Kath?
Yep, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I can't then see. Oh, so Brendan, yeah.
Sorry, can I just raise an issue that sort of really relates to the multiplier effect of having sort of two IT changes and their impacts on each other, which I think is the essence of the principal risk in the forces risk summary. We've obviously come a long way with the rolling out of new systems, but obviously the impact of control works control works and the next system that's going to roll out for command and control. On control works, one of the things that caused us to sort of stop a little bit was the sudden realization that we had 80,000 flags in the system that we had to roll over into the new system, and we had to effectively cleanse all of those, and that process is going to take some time, and we're working our way through how we do that. So it really, the question in my mind is, when we started out on the IT journey, we had a list of systems that we were going to turn off because they were going to be redundant, and there was going to be no requirement to keep them live. So I guess the question in my mind is if we've got that list, how far down the list have we got? And if we haven't turned off things that we thought we were going to turn off, what's the obstacle to doing that? And have we identified a solution? So it's the issue of how much progress we've made in basically turning off the legacies compared to what we originally thought when all the individual projects were approved.
I can answer that, Chair. Brendan, in terms of control works, we have turned off the system, the command and control system that Control Works has replaced. So that has gone ahead and been successful. The big where there is a multiple number of systems is in relation to Connect, which, as you're well aware, I know, has not yet gone live, and we're planning for the April timescale for that. So that is the big system where the large number of systems will be switched off. And there are a number of mitigations in place to make sure that when those systems are switched off, that Connect can not only adequately cover what they did, but also, you know, the reason for having Connect is that it improves the data that we have and improves the way that we use our data. So that is being very closely monitored, reviewed. The data ingestion into the new system has been ongoing for some time now. I wouldn't sit here and say that, you know, the implementation of a significant system like that is not without its risk. Of course it is, but we are looking at it very carefully, monitoring the benefits, and will then switch off the systems as and when we are confident and comfortable that the Connect system can absorb the functionality and improve upon it.
Vanessa, just to follow up on that, looking retrospectively at all of the other systems that we've replaced, have we turned off everything that we thought we would turn off? Or are we left with some systems running that, for whatever reason, we can't actually close down? Neil may have the answer to that, because they're across the whole, and some will be outside operational policing, I guess.
Yeah, I think, Brendan, everything that we originally planned to switch off and that we've been able to, we have. I think it's probably worth me doing a bit of a trawl rather than giving you a statement today, just to give you the assurance piece around each of those projects. What was the implementation and what did it replace? Whether it be an upgrade, a new system.
That'd be really helpful if you could do that, Neil. That would sort of close the issue down and stop me sort of scratching my head about it.
Yeah, we'll do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Richard was also indicating through that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just to build on that point, really. I don't know whether it's a piece of work for internal audit or somebody else, but I think it would be helpful for us just to have some sight or visibility of all the particular plates that are spinning at the moment in terms of projects and where we are with those. Because obviously they'll be at various points, and in my experience, particularly with IT projects, they tend to fall on the shoulders of the same people implementing the same sort of different systems. So I think some assurance about how we manage projects and how we manage the tensions between projects where they're competing for time or resource would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So I chair the Organisational Change Board, which has Mark sits on that board. That's where all that interdependency work is managed, where any changes to any projects, any change projects that change from the original business case, either in structure or benefits, comes through, so that we can absolutely understand the interdependencies and they get formally signed off at that board. Just to give some reassurance that we do have processes in place that bring the different change projects together and understand that wider piece of impact of one against the other.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of some interesting questions there, and I'm just thinking I'll liaise with Lynn, but I think it might be sensible to just think about whether we want a specific agenda item at a future meeting, just to ensure that we've got an end point to capture some of this interesting discussion, and to sort of pull the threads together. So I'll pick that up with Lynn afterwards, and we'll just think about where that might fit on future meeting agendas, bearing in mind that none of us can ordain what might happen after June, but we'll just think about ensuring that is being sort of closed off. Okay, thank you. Some really interesting questions raised there on item 7, as I thought there might be. I don't think there's anything else. Okay, no. So then if we can move on to item 8, then Lynn, and we'll see how long this takes. And if this is also a lengthy meeting, then lengthy discussion, we might take a comfort break at the end of it. But on to item 8, the internal audit update. Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. This is my usual update. I'll just give a brief overview of the key highlights. So in the last quarter, we finalised 8 audit reports. 2 were given limited assurance, 6 were given reasonable assurance. We've also finalised 1 further report since this was issued just before Christmas. In terms of the follow-up reviews, we followed up 36 audits, and the implementation rate on those recommendations is currently standing at 78%. That's slightly up from where we were last quarter, but it is lower than the same time last year. This time last year, we were running at about 87%. And I think what we are seeing is the impact of COVID on some of those recommendations. Some aspects are being delayed. You know, we've had Connect, which has been delayed, which was going to resolve some of the issues as well. But managers are engaging with us and are giving us regular updates, and we'll keep on with those updates. We are now giving managers the opportunity to accept the risk following the discussion at the last Joint Audit Committee. And I must say that most of them have come back and said they want to continue to monitor those recommendations. But we are giving them the option. There's been a couple of low-level recommendations which management have agreed to take forward themselves. But if we do get any significant risks accepted, we will include those in future reports to committee. In terms of the performance section, I think the main highlights for me there is to notify members around the audits that we're proposing are postponed into the next financial year. So I went away following the last meeting to have a discussion with senior management in both the force and the OPCC. And we've came up with a list of 5 potential audits that we are proposing to slip into Q1 of 2021-22. So we're not going to cancel these audits altogether, but just slip them in by a few months into the next financial year. I have liaised with the chair outside of this meeting, but I've included them in this report just to get final endorsement from the rest of the committee. And the only other thing for me to highlight is the 2 limited opinion reports. So Appendix A gave summary of those reports, which were on vetting and domestic abuse serial perpetrators. The second one on the serial perpetrators has only recently been issued, so I haven't necessarily got a big update for committee on that, but Gemma is in the meeting today, and she did the audit and is happy to answer any questions in support with me. And in terms of the vetting audit, members will recall this audit being done probably 2 or 3 years ago now, and we reported a minimal assurance opinion. You know, so the opinion has gone up. It is still limited, but it's largely due to the volume of aftercare vetting that still remains outstanding. But what I will say is it's much lower than it was previously. And the direction of travel is really positive in relation to vetting and aftercare. I think the manager involved with vetting at the moment is really proactive. I attended some of the project teams where some new initiatives were being driven forward, and it was a really positive experience to see the departments working together. So there was PSD, IT, information management, and the programme management team all working together to implement some of these new initiatives that will see positive impact on vetting generally and in the aftercare vetting. So I'm reasonably confident that the direction of travel is positive on that. And the latest update that I had in November on aftercare was that 3 new members of the team were recruited recently in the last few months during the COVID pandemic, and the aftercare vetting backlog is on target to be cleared by the end of 2021. So it was originally going to be May, but then we went into the lockdown position. Priority was given to getting new recruits into the force, but now the aftercare vetting, I understand, has been ring-fenced, and priority is being given to that area, and new staff have been recruited to try and achieve that target of December 2021. So it's really positive, I think, in terms of the progress that's being made and the new initiatives generally across vetting with some of the automations and online forms will stop the backlog from increasing, I think, in future. So it will enable us to focus on clearing the backlog that previously existed. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions that members have got on the report.
Okay. Are there any questions from anyone? Kath. Okay, Kath, I'm just going to disappear off screen for 2 minutes. I'll be able to hear you, Kath, but I've got to go and find a cable to plug my machine, which is down to 8% of its battery. So Kath, go on. I'll be able to hear what's going on, but you won't see me.
Thank you. I think this will probably go to Gemma. It's about the domestic abuse serial perpetrator review that was done. Gemma, do you have any insight into the safeguarding that sits around the victims and families of the DA serial perpetrators? There's information there about what's happening or what not happening with offenders. Have you got any insight into the support mechanism that's beyond that?
Hi, Kath. Yeah, so the PPU safeguarding teams would take the lead on that. And from speaking to the DA offender management teams, they have got a really close working relationship with that safeguarding team. So, for example, when a DA serial perpetrator is due to be released from prison, they will then liaise with that safeguarding team to make sure the victim services plan is kept up to date. So if there's any further safeguarding that needs to be done upon their release, they will manage that. But the DA team purely focus really on the offender management side.
I know it's a new report, Gemma. I look forward to reading that. But clearly there'd be some concerns around safeguarding, where from the report it's clear that some offenders who are identified as serial perpetrators are not getting the attention that they might deserve from some of the police teams.
Yeah, I mean, what the teams do also do, if they are high risk, they will develop a trigger plan, and that is circulated on force systems and with the MPUs if needs be. So if there is an incident with a victim, there is a comprehensive plan in place as to what actions to do really to manage that offender. So that all information is easily accessible to officers who are in response or on the MPUs that might get called to that incident.
Okay, well, Nikki Pennison, who is on secondment to the Violence Reduction Unit from Black Country Women's Aid, is doing a piece of work to look at the systemic management of DA issues through partners. So I think it would be really useful to share some of the insights that you've got from doing this piece of work with her to inform what that might look like.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Gemma.
No problem.
Thanks for that, Kath. And that perhaps points to what we'll be wanting to look at once we've seen once the follow-up is done, and we'll be able to see whether your concerns have been addressed. I'm not seeing any other hands up. Okay, so if everyone's happy with Lynn's report, then we'll move on to the paper 9 on governance. that Mark?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a brief introduction to the report and the appendix. Obviously, the committee is aware of the scheme of governance we have in place for the PCC and the Chief Constable. We do an annual review of it, and as part of the Joint Audit Committee's work programme, we bring the results of that annual review to you. It obviously links very closely to the annual governance statement, which we brought to committee in June this year. And the report you have in front of you just highlights the changes that we've made to the corporate governance framework, which we will, following this meeting, go through an approval process with the PCC. And those are very sort of minor in nature in terms of those amendments, which are detailed in 3.1 of the covering report. That's around delegations relating to complaints with the new legislation coming in this year in respect of how the OPCC deals with them, and also referencing to the Forces Director of Legal Services now providing legal advice to the OPCC where appropriate. The report then talks through some of the issues that were which were highlighted in the annual governance statements of the Force and the PCC. One of them, obviously, at the time was the impacts of COVID and the governance arrangements that have been put in place around COVID, which we've gone on to several stages of that, and we've detailed that in a lot of the conversations we've had today around sort of risk and what have you. And also we've commented in the report around the continued work internal audit has done in terms of the implementation of systems and the ongoing implementation of systems across the Force. The report then highlights sort of the potential changes in the future that might come in for a number of reasons. One of them being the review of PCCs, which is taking place at a national level, that might impact on the scheme of governance in terms of how PCCs operate. The one area is actually highlighted in terms of actual what's the threshold of a PCC decision at each individual PCC local level, because at the moment West Midlands have an arrangement which I'm sure is different to many PCCs across the country, and every other PCC might have a different arrangement to each other as well. Report makes reference to Brexit, obviously the impacts of Brexit in terms of the standing orders. From my understanding, the procurement arrangements across as a result of Brexit and the leaving of the EU are the same in terms of the arrangements which we will actually follow. Basically, UK law will just match what the EU law was, and we will in time might change that. And I know the government is launching a consultation around the sort of future of procurement, and obviously that will have to be adjusted in terms of the standing orders of the organisations, depending on the outcomes of those reviews. So that's just some of the main highlights from the review on the report itself, and I'd welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Are there any questions? Richard?
It's just a minor point, really, Chair, stroke Mark. Thought it was a fine document, thank you. There are, towards the back of the document, kind of page 45 and page 54, I think, there are a couple of references to the EU and the EC, and I just wonder whether that was just an oversight or whether we still have a relationship. I know the university sector are still plugged into various funding tranches that take them through kind of 2-3 years time, or is it just a tidying up exercise?
Yeah, so in terms of it'll be a tidying up exercise, because just as I mentioned, our procurement arrangements under UK law will really mirror what was under the previous EU arrangements, and it's just a tidying up exercise, referencing it correctly. But on that point around European funding, we are involved. The OPCC is involved in a European scheme with this Birmingham City Council, and that does go on for some time as well. So we're obviously aware of that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can't see that anybody else wants to come in, so I did mention a comfort break, and on the chat, which I can't join. I can see when people put things on the chat, but I can't get into it unless I'm quick. Someone has requested that we do take a comfort break, so if we take 10 minutes now, please, and then we'll resume at 14 minutes past 3. So if everyone's happy, we'll all go on to mute and resume in 10 minutes. Thanks. Okay, can I just check if everyone's back online? If you're behind your laptop or whatever it is, if you can turn on your camera, then I'll know you're there. Okay, I'm not seeing Gurindi yet, but it is 14 minutes past, so we will kick back. I've got Alex and Emily are both back with us, and we've come to the first of two papers from our external auditors, Grant Thornton. So if we can kick off with the joint audit findings, who's going to kick off, Emily or Alex?
I'll take that,
Emily,
Chair, if that's okay.
Okay, Emily, off you go.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a long document. There's a lot of information in there. I'm going to take the report as read, but I'm going to give you some high-level messages, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end. So in terms of our role as your external auditor, we provide two key outputs. We provide an opinion and a value for money conclusion. And there's other things that we do. So we have other powers and we have to report in the public interest, that sort of thing, but we haven't had to do any of that with your audit. We also undertake work on the whole of government accounts. That work is still in progress. We've done everything we can at this stage. There is a problem at the centre with the way that the information is to be submitted. And so we're in constant dialogue with Abby to make sure that we understand when we can press go and press the button for that to be submitted. And we'll action that as soon as we can. And then when that's all complete, we're able to certify and close the audit. So coming back to the two main outputs, the first one is the opinion. You'll be pleased to know that we provided an unqualified opinion. That means that your accounts, your financial statements are true and fair in our view, and also that they've been properly prepared following the Code of Audit Practice for Local Authority Accounting and in accordance with the requirements of the Local Audit and Accountability Act. I think it's really important this year to note that it's been a strange year. We've all been working remotely. As you're aware, there's been all sorts of pressures in terms of the additional quality that we've had to meet in terms of pensions and property, plant and equipment. And I'd just like to express our extreme thanks to the finance team under Neil and Mark, led by Devinder very closely, but Abby's been absolutely pivotal this year in delivering a really good set of working papers and responding really well to our requests and making sure that we get information in a timely way and it's as good as it can be. It's really difficult remotely, so we really appreciate that partnership working. Moving on to value for money. Again, we've given a positive conclusion this year, which means that we found proper arrangements in place for securing the 3 E's and for you using your use of resources. It's worth noting that we identified one key risk, which we've reported on, and that was financial sustainability. As you can see, we've undertaken detailed work looking at your 1920 outturn, your 2021 budget, looking at your medium-term financial plan, and there's some recommendations around that for the timing of when that goes forward for next year, looking at your reserve strategy, and also looking at your WMP 2020 transformation programme, which again raised another recommendation around cashable and non-cashable savings and how those are captured and reported. I think a key message for us is that you have significant operational pressures. You also have the COVID impact on reduced income and changes to the delivery of your services. And also, as Mark's also mentioned, you've had another 1-year settlement. And this provides a significant pressure on the finances of the force and the PCC. So this will be a key focus for our work next year for the value for money conclusion. It's also worth noting that that work links very closely with the going concern work, which we report upon within our opinion. And again, we have concerns that you are moving closer towards a position where you are becoming under pressure. It's worse than it was last year, and it is something we will be focusing on next year. It's probably worth noting at this point that there's been a change to the audit code, and so for next year the work that we undertake on value for money will be slightly different. We'll be focusing on 3 areas: governance, financial sustainability, and how the authority improves the 3 E's, economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So that's something that we'll be talking to you about, but it does mean that we'll be looking into this in more detail and reporting to you in a broader way. You'll get more information next year. The only other thing to note, just that we, at the end of the report, there's some appendices. One of them details the recommendations. We've done some follow-up work on those raised last year. Due to COVID primarily, there's been limited progress, so we've re-raised so that those actions don't get lost. And we've also raised some other recommendations which have been agreed with officers. And then finally, we've also had to report, we have to report on our fees. So we've made that information transparent, and that's included. Alex will probably talk a little bit more about that, because the final fee has been reported in the annual audit letter. We were unsure at the point of finalising the joint audit findings report. I haven't got anything else I wanted to draw your attention to, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, are there questions from members? By the way, it was very good to hear what you said about the level of cooperation and the swift responses that you were getting from the finance teams, and the way that the audit was proceeded smoothly, despite all of the difficulties that everyone was facing. And I'm sure the thanks would want to be reciprocated for the way that you and your team understood the difficulties and were flexible in the way that you were working on it. So it's been a good outcome. Nobody's indicating that they've got any. Oh yes, Brendan.
It's really just a general question. Emily, sort of given your overview of other forces, are you seeing us in a context where broadly everyone is going to be under the same degree of pressure, and therefore, in a sense, where we've moved to is reflective of policing in general?
Thank you, Brendan. I think it's difficult to compare, because every local government body is in the same position with the 1-year settlement, so that creates the pressure that's consistent across all bodies. I think there's an element of scale in this, so in some ways it's better for a larger body to have a 1-year settlement, because then, better to be a larger body with a 1-year settlement, because you can get those economies and efficiencies within your delivery. However, it does mean that the margin of error is much harder to control. I think the other thing to note in the conversations that I've been having with Neil are around the fact that as a force, you made a decision about 5 years ago to implement WMP 2020, and that was to make a conscious decision to actually invest reserves to try and create some of these efficiencies. There's been a little bit of slippage on some of the projects which are still hanging over, and as internal audit was saying, around the delay of some of the projects being brought in. But ultimately you have, I think, put yourselves in a very strong position from that point of view. The way I described it to Neil and Mark was, I was saying, we talk about being close to the cliff edge in terms of, you know, where are you going to be in terms of dropping off that cliff edge in financial terms. In previous years, you were as things went on, the cliff edge kept moving away from you at a fairly steady level, which meant that actually you weren't getting any closer. I think this year you have moved closer to it, but you're not there. So there's still time for the finances to be looked at and developed, and the medium-term financial plan to be worked on, to give that really clear understanding of where that cliff edge is in relation to your position. I don't know if Neil or Mark want to comment on that any further.
Yeah, I can come in. You're exactly right, Emily. We've had this conversation over the last few months around, you know, our ability to build a strong, robust medium-term financial plan in the backdrop of short-term settlements, lack of consistency around things like pay awards, and the materiality any of those changes make in terms of that planning. So, you know, yes, Mark and I work closely to try and put a robust plan together with different scenarios, but it is a very changeable feast. So we are looking at, you know, taking advice from Grant Thornton about when is the right time of the year to revise your medium-term financial plan, whilst also trying to influence nationally around a comprehensive spending review. So it's trying to juggle those and spin a number of plates, whilst still giving the organisation the ability to be creative, be innovative, invest, reinvest, drive out cashable and non-cashable savings, and still deliver a great service to the people of the West Midlands. And I think, I fully understand there's a bit of a context piece here, and it's very difficult, I think, from a financial management perspective to say we know exactly what the financial climate's going to be for the next 5 years, and if we could, it'd be great, and we could put clear plans in place to deliver that. But we feel very reactive at the moment, so we're trying best to push against that.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Yes, indeed, and we all understand that that there are massive external influences, and there are some folk who've got an ability to make a difference, but from within the force that's quite difficult. No doubt. Of course, we have elections for a new commissioner coming up in the spring, and undoubtedly all candidates will be asked questions about how they think they will be able to influence the settlements and the financial position of the force in their role. Okay, are there any other questions? No? Okay, so again, I'd reiterate my thanks to Emily and Alex and all their team on the work that they've done to get us to what looks like a very satisfactory situation on the audit. So we'll come on then to the audit letter, and Alex is presenting this, is she?
She is indeed, yes, thank you, Sue. So again, as Emily said around the audit findings report, I'll take the paper as largely read. The annual audit letter really is a summary of all the work that we've undertaken for that financial year, so for 1920. It brings together all the findings. The idea is that it's a public-facing document, so you're expected to put it on your website so a member of the public can see it if they so choose. So as I say, I wasn't going to go through it in any huge amounts of detail. I mean, in terms of what's actually in there, I will touch on fees because Emily's mentioned that. In terms of what's in there, obviously it sets out the work that we've actually done. And it also says that following on obviously from the audit, we did give the audit opinion, and we gave it on an unqualified opinion and an unqualified VFM conclusion on the 30th of November. And just to put that in some context around that, so nationally, I mean, obviously the deadline moved from the 31st of July back to the 30th of November. But what we've actually found nationally is that something like only 45% of audits are actually delivered by that point, and actually many of us are still battling with 1920 audits going forward, and that's the same across all audit suppliers. It's not just Grant Thornton. So that puts some context, and I think it just also reinforces what Emily said about how well the audit went this year, and so it's a huge thanks, because obviously I've not worked with you before, huge thanks from me really in terms of how your staff and team have actually liaised with us, because it has been a difficult year and there has been an awful lot of work to do, and so massive thank you from me. So as I say, I wasn't going to go through the report on a page-by-page basis. For those of you that have read it in detail, you will probably spot that it is pretty much a copy and paste job anyway from the audit findings report. I think the one thing that I will mention, which is what Emily referred to earlier, is around the fees, which is in Appendix A at the back of the report. You'll probably know that PSAA, who oversee the framework contract for awarding external audits, they set a scale fee for both the PCC and the Chief Constable, and that's actually set out in Appendix A. But what we found, and I think we've previously reported back to you, that we have found that because of the demands of the regulator and also changes around some of the requirements on us as external auditors, we have asked for an additional audit fee, which is was proposed back at the planning stage. In addition to that, obviously, there were some additional costs around COVID because it did take longer to do the audit. And we did work extremely well together, but clearly working remotely is more problematic on both sides, and there is a cost to that. Now, we've tried to absorb as much of that cost as we possibly can, recognising that, for example, we weren't doing as much travel, etc. But we found on average something like an additional 15% across the board was required to actually recoup the additional costs that we've actually incurred. So we've put that in the back of the annual audit letter. Now, clearly, we need to discuss and agree that with yourselves, which we have done, and then it goes off to PSAA, who actually oversee it and actually will approve it or not approve it, as the case may be. So we're in the process of sending it off to PSAA for their review, and they'll come back in due course, and they may actually have individual conversations with yourself on what that, whether you think the fee is reasonable or not. So until that's agreed, we won't actually be billing that particular fee. That's kind of all I was going to say really on the annual audit letter, but I'm happy to take any questions from anybody if there are any.
Okay, does anybody else want to come in at this stage? If not, can I just pick up one thing? Because I had got a question which really was on the previous report, but it's mentioned in this one too. So I'll forgive myself for slipping up there. It relates to an issue that's mentioned in both reports on the pension liability, and specifically the MacLeod judgment on age discrimination, which when it was first announced, I think had led to an expectation that would lead to significant increases in pension liability. Now, the way that the audit report reads, it seems to suggest that actually there's been less of a liability than we were anticipating, which somewhat surprised me. But when I raised that question with Mark, he thought I'm not sure that his response to me suggested that the sorts of figures we were seeing were actually directly related. So I don't know whether anybody can help me on that, because there's a figure mentioned in one of the reports of 93 million, which is a reduction in terms of liability, which seems to be tied directly to that judgment as opposed to the triennial valuation. Can anyone help me in just teasing out whether there is a correlation between the figure and the issue?
Chair, would you like me to just comment on where the figures have come from?
Yeah.
So we had discussions with the finance team around the potential movement that could occur between the date that the actuary provide their report, which is usually around, I think it's the end of January, and the end of March. Now, in an ordinary year, with markets fairly stable, then we would be able to expect some sort of evidence that says actually the markets haven't moved that much. We still assess that this estimate that's been provided to us by the actuary is broadly in line with where it should be, and our accounts aren't materially misstated. Due to the volatility of markets this year, we put the question to the force, and they decided that they were going to go back to the actuary and ask them the question, as most forces did. When they did that, they got the figures back to say that there was actually a reduction. Now, I'm not sure if that is based totally upon the MacLeod issue, but basically we've taken information that's come from your expert and you've put into your financial statements, and we've then checked back to that and said actually that's the best information, because we're not pension experts on this. So we're working on information directly from your actuary for that.
Okay. It's there may be deeper explanations, but they're not material to this. I was just puzzled when I read it. So thank you for that, Emily. Okay. Is there anyone else wanting to come in then on the audit letter? No, everyone's happy. Okay, thank you very much, Alex. So that simply then leaves us with the audit committee's work plan, which only now has one further meeting to go for this financial year. Are there any questions on that? We take that as read. Okay, fine.
Chair, it's
Who's
Jonathan
that?
here. Just
Yes,
occurs to me, it's
Jonathan.
Jonathan here. Just very quickly, just for your awareness, we are thinking hard about what happens if the election is postponed again.
Yes.
There's nothing definitive on that yet, but it is possible that that will be the case.
Yeah, a whole set more extended contracts. And,
well, quite.
Yeah, quite. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can't do anything but speculate. But I'm glad you're you're thinking about a plan B. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. If there's nothing else, then thank you to everyone for your contributions to the meeting. Thank you to those who wrote the papers, which have all been very clear and helpful to us. We'll conclude the meeting. I hope everyone will continue to stay safe, and that by the time we meet again, at least some of us will have had a jab and be feeling safer than perhaps we are at the moment. But take care, everyone, and we will close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.